Hello, my name is Davinderth, and today I would like to talk to you about my vision of humanities librarianship at Bates College. During this presentation, I'll discuss the role of the research librarian in a liberal arts college, the research life cycle, and in particular the research life cycle of the humanities. I'll go over disciplinary standards for primary source literacy, and in particular how those apply to the humanities. I will discuss some possible collection development initiatives, and I will discuss how inclusivity informs the practice of humanities librarianship. So librarians help fulfill the mission of both research and education by serving and bridging the needs of both student learners and faculty researchers. They also help students to understand the ACRL framework for information literacy for higher education in order to become critical thinkers and engaged citizens by understanding that authority is constructed and contextual, information creation is a process, information has scholarly, social, cultural, political, and ethical value, research is a process of exploration and inquiry, and finally, and perhaps most importantly, that scholarship is a conversation. In terms of this particular position, humanities research has some characteristics that are sometimes different from other types of research. Research in the humanities differs from research in social sciences or natural sciences in a number of important ways. The central focus of humanities research is on the analysis of textual, archival, and historical cultural materials and events, peoples, and organizations, rather than the design and implementation of a research study. Also, in humanities scholarship, the format is much less structured and fundamental than it is in social science and natural science research articles, where formatting requirements are usually quite clear, including sections on literature review, methods, data, and interpretation. Some key components of humanities research focus primarily on in-depth interactions with both primary and secondary source materials, which often take place in both the primary text and the footnotes. Also, in humanities, both books and journal articles are key formats for secondary sources. Primary sources in the humanities consist of a wide range of literary texts or historical materials that are created by the key subjects of the research, or which are contemporary evidence that are related to the key research objects and subjects. Humanities databases also usually include these multiple secondary source formats. In more general periodical databases, such as Academic Search Complete, limiting searches to academic journals is a good starting point for finding humanities research articles. The length of humanities articles and the amount and complexity of footnotes/endnotes are much more relevant in whether or not a source is a good humanities research source than in the social sciences and natural sciences. And articles and books should include regular use of both primary and secondary source material throughout. Another difference in the humanities research is that studies typically retain their value more over time than social studies and natural sciences studies. As a rule of thumb, if a book or research article was published in the last 25 years or so, it may well still have value as a research source, which is very different from the social sciences and the natural sciences. The research life cycle of the humanities looks different than it does for certain other fields. Here's one example of how that might look, and that is to format general research questions and then choose relevant sites and subjects to use to analyze those questions, and then collect the relevant data, interpret the data, and then apply that to conceptual and theoretical work. And this is where it's slightly different as that's a conversation that moves in both directions as you finalize and make your research question more, fine-tune it throughout the process. Maybe you have to make a tighter specification of the question. Maybe you need to collect more data. Maybe you have to reconfigure or rethink your conceptual and theoretical framework that you're applying. And then finally, you write up your findings. Here's another way that you could look at the research life cycle. Another image of that. Now, for the National Endowment of the Humanities, they also help us in thinking about the humanities research life cycle when they help us understand that data also applies to humanities research. Now, for them, data are defined as the materials that are generated or collected during the course of conducting research. And humanities data can look like many different things. It can be citations, software code, algorithms, digital tools, documentation, geospatial coordinates, reports, articles, our primary sources. And so it's important for humanities faculty, and this is a role that the librarian can help with, to have a plan for how they will also archive and share their research data and help to understand that data management plans are not just a thing for social scientists and natural scientists. Another thing that's important for a humanities librarian to help students and faculty understand are the different disciplinary standards for primary source literacy. Now there's a number of these, but one of the main ones is the Research Competency Guidelines for Literature in English, and this applies across the humanities, which was developed by the ACRL's Literatures in English section. And these guidelines are to understand the structure of information within the field of literary research, to identify and use key literary research tools in order to locate relevant information, to plan effective search strategies and modify search strategies as needed, to recognize and make appropriate use of library services in the research process, to understand that some information sources are more authoritative than others and demonstrate critical thinking in the research process, to understand the technical and ethical issues involved in writing research essays, to locate information about the literary profession itself. And the purpose of these guidelines are multiple. Number one is to aid students of literatures in English and other humanities in the development of thorough and productive research skills. Number two is to encourage the development of a common language for librarians, faculty, and students involved with research related to literatures in English and other humanities. Number three is to encourage librarian and faculty collaboration in the teaching of research methods to students of literatures in the humanities. Number four is to assist in the development of a shared understanding of student competencies and needs. Number five is to aid librarians and faculty in the development of research methods courses at the undergraduate and graduate levels. Other important guidelines to consider are the ACRL Joint and Society of American Archivists Joint Task Force Guidelines on Primary Source Literacy. Also, information literacy guidelines and competencies for undergraduate history students. And finally, the Modern Language Association statement on the significance of the primary record. So what is primary source literacy? According to some of these same joint task forces, they define primary source literacy as the combination of knowledge, skills, and the abilities necessary to effectively find, interpret, evaluate, and ethically use primary sources within disciplinary contexts in order to create new knowledge or to revise existing understandings. What does that mean? So conceptualizing, we can see, means many things, but it means to be able to distinguish the source type, to understand the interrelatedness of the sources, to help refine the research question based on these sources, and to recognize that research is an iterative process. Finding access and accessing means being able to distinguish between online source resources, being able to use effective search strategies, understanding the potential differences between physical and digital objects, and recognizing that certain policies may impact access. Understanding is to understand that sources are a product of their time period, to identify the source type, and to understand that multiple iterations may exist. For example, multiple translations of a book, that type of thing. And then analyzing is being able to assess the appropriateness of a source for research goals, being able to evaluate the perspective, tone, potential bias, the audience, and subjectivity, contextualize the source within the larger conversation, and consider possible reasons for gaps, contradictions, and silences on various ongoing discussions within that realm or within that argument. And then using, and that is being able to synthesize a diverse set of sources, being able to respect privacy rights in cultural contexts, appropriate citation and data management, and making sure to adhere to privacy and copyright laws. It's also important as an instructional librarian to help understand the career diversity skills that many employers and educational institutions look at. And these are communication, collaboration, quantitative literacy, intellectual self-confidence, and digital literacy. Lots of companies have emphasized the need for these skills in their hiring of new students, and so it's important that instructional librarians help develop these skills. Incorporating primary source literacy is incredibly important, especially in today's era of misinformation and disinformation campaigns. I personally teach information literacy classes in order to empower students to critically analyze information in a way that can be transferred to other areas of their academic pursuits and their practical lives as well. My teaching philosophy is active learning, accessibility, reflection, and flexibility, and I draw from the ACRL framework for information literacy for higher education when developing these lesson plans and ideas, and also seek to incorporate underrepresented voices as examples in my instruction and research. It's also important to understand the emerging scholarly practices particularly in humanities librarianship. So one of these is scholarly communication, and in particular open access. The Bethesda Statement of Open Access Publishing defines open access as the author and copyright holder granting to all users a free, irrevocable, worldwide, perpetual right of access to, and a license to copy, use, distribute, transmit, and display the work publicly, and to make and distribute derivative works in any digital medium for any responsible purpose, subject to proper attribution of authorship, as well as the right to make small numbers of printed copies for their personal use. Another emerging trend is digital scholarship, which the guidelines for the professional evaluation of digital scholarship define as scholarship that is either produced using computational tools and methods or presented using digital technologies. Within digital scholarship, it's important to collaborate with the individual faculty and other librarians in order to provide relevant workshops that may involve different tech-related skills or certain research projects, and also to help meet individual research needs of both students and faculty. Another important area of humanities librarianship is collection development initiatives. In order to meet these, it's important to identify community needs, and this can be done by meeting with faculty and undergraduate students in order to build relationships, discuss new funding sources, whether that's new faculty funds when they're hired or grants they may have. It's also important to identify specific course offerings in order to identify areas in the collection that may be lacking or specific areas that need to be focused on during new purchases of monographs and journal subscriptions, and also to collaborate with other liaison librarians for cross-disciplinary projects and purchases in order to be more efficient, to not make duplicate purchases, and to make funds go further. Also, obviously, it's important to create a diverse collection. And in order to do this, it's important to identify underrepresented voices within the collection or that are not present in the collection, and then to work with faculty and undergraduate students to help address those weaknesses and fill those gaps. It's also important to help illuminate the collections, and this means to be able to show faculty and students what sort of resources are available. This can be done by creating LibGuides or other guides, and also by hosting events, particularly for collections like special collections, to help showcase what they contain. And then finally, it's important to practice inclusivity in all areas of librarianship, including the humanities. Um, these include practicing inclusive practices. I try and make sure that all aspects of my librarianship contribute to create an inclusive environment, including primary source literacy and ensuring that all voices and perspectives are necessary to see the bigger picture and to analyze why there may be certain omissions or gaps. Within emerging scholarly practices, it's important to use different means of instruction and evaluation for different students in order to make sure that principles of universal design are met, that accessibility is achieved for students. And then finally, in collection development, to ensure that all voices are represented within the collection. And then this is my works cited page. Thank you very much.